A new Republican agenda. What happens after last week's healthcare failure? Renewed grief in South Korea. A Catholic priest consoles families who lost loved ones in a ferry accident. Viral Vatican video.
Like any good godfather, I wanted to take her to see the Holy Father.
An interview with the man responsible for stealing the Pope's heart and hat. And Da Vinci's cleaner, brighter Adoration of the Magi reveals new details. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, March 28, 2017. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Speaker Paul Ryan says he's going to give battered House Republicans another crack at overhauling health care, but he's offering no timeline. The GOP still needs to overcome deep division in the party that led to the implosion of their bill last week. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi has more. Jason.
Lauren, Speaker Ryan says defunding Planned Parenthood should be included in a bill to replace Obamacare. He met with House Republicans today for the first time since he yanked the GOP healthcare bill that faced certain defeat Friday. Now, he says it's back to the drawing board.
We are all going to work together and listen together until we get this right. It is just too important.
Speaker Ryan says the Obamacare repeal is still on the table. Today, Republican congressmen, conservatives and moderates alike met behind closed doors for nearly 2 hours. GOP leaders say there's consensus to work on the issue again, and preferably soon.
We promised that we would repeal and replace Obamacare, and that's exactly what we're going to do.
The conservative House Freedom Caucus said last week's bill didn't go far enough in erasing Obamacare, but others in the party say they're not giving up.
I'm a former Navy SEAL, man. I don't know what quit means. So I don't think that we should quit. I think that we should move forward, and I think that we will.
Some moderate Republicans want the defunding of Planned Parenthood pulled out of the bill.
That was a sticking point, and it was in there because of the Freedom Caucus. And now that we've lost their support, my own expectation is that would be one of the big question marks moving forward.
Dr. Andy Harris of Maryland, who's a member of the conservative bloc, predicts that it will stay in the bill.
I mean, Planned Parenthood has always been accepted as part of this bill, so I'm sure that, I feel confident it'll be in the final.
The healthcare debate comes as the GOP has at least one clear bright spot, Trump's nomination of conservative appeals court Judge Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. The Senate is expected to vote on that nomination next week. Lauren?
Jason, did the GOP give any indication of when a new bill could come out?
Speaker Ryan did not give any timetable. He says it's imperative that the party come together, work through all the details to get it right.
Correspondent Jason Calvi on Capitol Hill, thank you. President Donald Trump signs a new executive order today fulfilling a campaign pledge to support coal, jobs, and effectively unraveling former President Barack Obama's plan to curb carbon emissions and stem global warming.
Ready?
With the flourish of a pen, President Trump eliminates more than a half dozen Obama-era climate change measures. His executive order initiates a review of the Clean Power Plan. It pledged to reduce emissions by 32% by 2030, roll back the Council on Environmental Quality guidance on the social cost of carbon.
This will allow the EPA to focus on its primary mission of protecting our air and protecting our water. Together, we are going to start a new energy revolution.
The Trump administration is still discussing whether the U.S. intends to withdraw from the 2015 Paris Agreement. The multi-nation effort was championed by Obama and designed to keep the global temperature rise below 2 degrees Celsius by cutting carbon emissions. The Catholic Church teaches that we need to be stewards of God's creation to promote the common good and the dignity of the human person.
Pope Francis has endorsed the Paris Accords.
Professor Kevin Forbes is an energy economist at the Catholic University of America.
Because in the Catholic faith, we recognize that we have obligations to future generations and to the environment as a whole.
But the Church leaves the faithful free to decide how best to do that. The House Ways and Means Committee wants to review President Trump's tax returns from the past 10 years. Lawmakers would look at the documents behind closed doors if the proposal is approved. Members want to see what, if any, connection the president has had with foreign governments. City leaders from across the United States intensify their fight against President Trump's crackdown on sanctuary cities, or cities that allow illegal immigrants. The White House is threatening to withhold funding from cities which violate federal immigration laws. A member of the New York City Council vows to become the Trump administration's worst nightmare. House Intelligence Chairman Devin Nunez rejects calls to step aside from the Russia investigation, replying to reporters, "Why would I?" Democratic leaders in the House and Senate want Nunez to resign from the committee's Russia probe after revelations about his meeting with a secret source at the White House.
The way forward, in my view, if in fact the majority of Republicans in the House want to have a fair and objective process moving forward, they need to replace Devin Nunez.
This morning, House Speaker Paul Ryan expressed his confidence, his full confidence in Nunez. He says there is no need for the committee chairman to resign. Joining us now is John Gizzi, White House correspondent for Newsmax. Thanks, John, for being here.
Thanks for having me, Lauren. Always a pleasure.
Let's make some sense out of all of this.
Sure.
Is he going to resign?
No.
Okay, why not, and should he?
He does not believe he's done anything wrong, and there is not a cacophony within his own party calling on him to go. Speaker Ryan has expressed confidence in him, as well as the members of the Intelligence Committee.
And then there's that little thing of history on his side.
Exactly. The fact is that were he to resign, that would be the first time in 63 years that the chairman of a major committee in Congress were to step down. That was Senator Joseph McCarthy of Wisconsin, chairman of the Senate Permanent Investigation Subcommittee, who was forced to step down in favor of fellow Republican Senator Carl Munt of South Dakota.
We're hearing a lot. Jared Kushner, senior White House official and President Trump's son-in-law, is also being questioned on his meetings with Russian officials. And there's a lot of question about this investigation into the White House. How serious do you think all of this is?
Well, one is obviously looking for a solution in search of an answer here. The answer is already in the minds of many, that the Russians interfered in the U.S. elections. Did they? Probably. They've been doing so for many years, going back at least to 1960. Did it have any impact? That's very unclear. The fact is that people want this investigation, and they are going to want to get out of the way anyone who is seen as an implement or a roadblock to it. Now, I don't believe that's the case with Chairman Nunez, someone I've known since he was a freshman congressman. He's the epitome of intellectual honesty. But there are those who seek to make partisan gain from Putingate, and therefore they seek to get Mr. Nunez out of the way and get someone who, in their eyes, is a more pliable chairman.
You talk about the Russians being involved. You mentioned France and Germany as bellwethers or barometers.
What I simply say is to watch France and Germany. It is no secret that Vladimir Putin has an interest in the outcome of both elections, and particularly in the case of France, where candidate Marine Le Pen of the National Front met with him in Moscow last week. When I saw her here 5 years ago, she spoke of her admiration for Vladimir Putin. She got a $9 million loan, or €9 million loan from the Czech bank. So Russian involvement in the electoral processes of other nations is going on right now.
All right, John Gizzi, White House correspondent for Newsmax, always a pleasure.
A delight. Thanks for having me, Lauren.
Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. A priest is murdered in Mexico. The Vatican says Father Felipe Carrillo Altamirano was apparently a victim of robbery. Mexico's Council of Bishops says he served indigenous people on the Pacific coast state of Nayarit. He is the second priest to be killed this year in Mexico. An estimated 32 priests have been murdered in Mexico since 2006. The Trump administration significantly increases military support for the fight against al-Qaeda in Yemen. The Wall Street Journal says the move also helps other Arab nations keep Iran's influence from growing. The news comes as a suicide bomber attacked a government building in Yemen, killing 5 soldiers. Guards managed to shoot the attacker before he drove his vehicle inside an office. A ferry that sunk off the coast of South Korea 3 years ago is raised out of the water. Relatives of the more than 300 passengers, mostly high school students, gathered today for an emotional service. Using holy water and incense, Catholics prayed with Protestants and Buddhists. 9 bodies remain missing. Lawmakers in Scotland approve a new referendum which could lead to independence from Britain.
Yes, 69, no, 59. There were no abstentions. The motion as amended is therefore agreed.
The referendum would go before voters a year or 2 from now. They already rejected independence in 2014, but Britain's exit from the EU has renewed the debate. Pope Francis sends a message to the United Nations. We need a world without nuclear weapons. The Holy Father tells the president of the conference focused on nuclear weapons, I sincerely wish that the efforts of this conference may be fruitful and provide effective contribution to advancing an ethic of peace and multilateral and cooperative security which humanity very much needs today. He was just being a good godfather. But what happened catapulted his godchild into a worldwide video star. When Mountain Buterax handed his goddaughter to the Pope at an audience, 3-year-old Estella Westrick took the zucchetto right off of his head. The man, who's known as the Catholic Traveler, joins us now from Rome. Welcome to the program. Mountain, how did this chance meeting happen?
Well, my goddaughter's family came to Rome, and so like any good godfather, I wanted to take her to see the Holy Father. And so we lined up at St. Peter's Square at 7 a.m., got a good spot in the front row right behind some VIPs. And as the Pope was coming around greeting people, I was praying that he would take her, and I launched Facebook Live to share with my friends and family back home. And one of the gentlemen of the papal household said, may I take her? And I said, of course. And he grabbed her and took her over to the Holy Father.
Yes. When someone says, can you take someone to the Holy Father? The answer is always yes. The video has 1 million views and counting.
Exactly.
When did you realize this was going viral?
Right. Well, 19 minutes after I shared it on Twitter, so I took a clip from the Facebook post and put it on Twitter, I had a call from CBS, and they sent over a film crew to the apartment, and within the next 2 hours, I had about 90 phone calls. So by then, I knew it was going to go viral.
Right. 90 phone calls from whom?
I had NBC, ABC, Fox News, CNN. Jimmy Kimmel called me at 2 o'clock in the morning. Jimmy Fallon ran with it. It was all over the place. I had people from Cambodia wanting to do interviews.
Really?
The Philippines, Australia, New Zealand. Yeah, everywhere. Everywhere.
What feedback have you been getting since all of this happened? What does your mom say?
Well, my mom loves it, of course. I mean, she works at my parish back home, so all the people are talking to her about it. We saw your kid on the news. But really, the star of the show is Estella and her brave snatching of the zucchetto. And that's been what's most fun, because really she doesn't care at all. I mean, she's 3 years old,
Right.
So as soon as she did it, she was like, can we go to lunch now?
Right,
So that's been a lot of fun.
And 3-year-olds, I mean, it's all about what's right in front of you at that moment. Pope, lunch. Pope, lunch, right?
Right.
All right, well, you can learn more about this story. Thank you so much, Mountain. You have a website called thecatholictraveler.com. I encourage everyone to go see that. Thank you so much for joining us. Coming up, Path to Sainthood, the push to canonize 2 children from Fatima. Wearing religious habits in Nebraska public schools will soon be legal. The state's Republican governor signed a bill this week allowing religious clothing, including hijabs, to be worn. The measure was introduced after a nun was rejected for a substitute teaching job because her faith calls on her to wear a habit. The move ends a 98-year ban enacted under pressure from the Ku Klux Klan during a time of intense anti-Catholic sentiment. A group of religious hospitals, one of which is Catholic, is asking the Supreme Court for protection from a lawsuit that claims they are not part of a church. The case, Advocate Healthcare Network versus Stapleton, came before the Supreme Court yesterday. The question is whether faith-based hospitals are religious enough to offer employees tax-exempt church pension plans. In oral arguments, Lisa Blatt, who represents the religious hospitals, referred to U.S. law on pensions, saying, quote, "The text does not require a church to establish benefit plans for someone else's employees." Joining us now to make sense of all of this is Eric Baxter, senior counsel for Beckett, who submitted a friend of the court and amicus brief on behalf of faith-based hospitals. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's good to be here with you.
We are going to make it a little bit more understandable. The justices are asking basically whether religious hospitals must guarantee workers' pensions. Is that right?
So church plans are not regulated by the government, and that's because churches were the first organizations in America to offer pension benefits, and today they offer better and more secure benefits than the industry standard. So Congress has always allowed church organizations to be exempt from the pension laws.
All the requirements that they would have to go through, you're better off spending that money helping the poor.
Everyone knows it's millions of dollars to comply with the regulations, and the government said we'd rather have you using those to serve underserved communities.
But the other side of the argument says that, hey, wait a minute, your retirement savings there isn't going to have all of the security that it might need.
And that's just not true, because church plans also make sure that their plans are well insured, well funded. In practice, they're the most secure and best benefit plans out there.
So why do the hospitals deserve a tax-exempt church plan? And let's look at the amicus brief. You write, the court should reject, as a matter of law, several allegations the plaintiffs used to try to show that Advocate, one of the hospitals, lacks sufficient religious convictions to qualify for the exemption.
Yeah, there's a misconception that if you're a church, all you do is worship, and that's all you should be doing. And if you actually practice what is preached on the weekends, if you go out during the week and practice that you're no longer a church. But that's ridiculous. Everyone, all religious people, what they do is one of the most important things about their religion. And so just because you go out to serve the poor doesn't disqualify you from being a church.
One of our producers found an article that says that 1 in 6 American hospitals is affiliated with the Catholic Church. That's a lot of hospitals.
These organizations do great work, and it's not just hospitals, it's nursing homes, it's schools. It can be a lot of different organizations that serve, underserved communities and help them with this money that would otherwise be spent on lawyers.
How do you think the justices are going to rule on this? I think it comes in May or later in the year.
I'm very optimistic. For 40 years, the IRS has recognized that church should be interpreted broadly, and the Supreme Court is going to uphold that, I think.
I always love that. The Supreme Court is going to uphold that, I think. Okay, thank you so much. Great to see you again, Eric. Eric Baxter, senior counsel for Beckett. The Bishop of Fatima, Portugal, says the Pope's visit to the shrine this May would not be complete without the canonization of 2 shepherd children who Mary appeared to 100 years ago. Last week, the Holy Father announced a second miracle attributed to the siblings, Francisco and Jacinta Marto. This clears the way for the 2 to become the youngest non-martyr saints. To get more details on the bishop's remarks and the cause for canonization, visit our news partners at CatholicNewsAgency.com. Up next, a new poll. Pope Francis praised as a world leader. Plus, a surprise discovery in one of Leonardo da Vinci's paintings.
Ma signore, non è ultimo modello, ma vai avanti.
Pope Francis encourages Christians to live life with joy. During his homily at Mass this morning, the Holy Father urged the faithful also to avoid complaining and ask the Lord for help to know the joy of salvation. Fortune magazine is out with its annual list of world's greatest leaders, and the Pope comes in at number 3. The magazine looks at people from all over the globe who are transforming the world and inspiring others. The only 2 people to beat the Pope are Theo Epstein, the Chicago Cubs president, and Alibaba executive chairman Jack Ma. A recent study says the poor are better off materially today than in the past. The American Enterprise Institute's report says this is thanks to government assistance and not because the poor are earning more on their own. Joining us now is Robert Dorr, resident fellow in poverty studies at the American Enterprise Institute, and you're one of the authors of that report.
That's right. I was the editor, and I wrote a chapter on child support enforcement.
Tell me what is working and not working.
Well, programs that encourage people to get into work and then reward work by topping up their wages and make them feel comfortable in a situation where work pays, those programs are successful. Programs that don't encourage work and just provide assistance with no attention to the issue of earning or people being able to get into employment, I think are not as successful.
Can you point to any of those programs in particular?
Well, the SNAP program, or food stamps, a great program, provides a great deal of assistance to struggling Americans, which I believe in, but it doesn't do enough to help people get into employment, which is really what they want. They want to earn their own success, not escape poverty through transfer payments alone.
So how would you transform SNAP?
I would ask the state operators of those programs to do a deeper dive, to ask people, how can we help you get into a job? I would ask them to report on the extent to which they have able-bodied, perfectly healthy, working-age individuals who are on SNAP but are reporting no earnings. And I'd ask them to make that part of their objective, help people get employment so that they no longer need food stamps.
But a lot of people, I believe, think that people who are on food stamps, people who are poor, don't want to work. What you're saying is that's not true.
It isn't true. They don't. That they do want to work, and we learned in the reform of welfare reform 20 years ago that people who said that people on cash welfare didn't want to work and couldn't work were wrong then. No, they want to work. They'd much rather earn their own success. When I was the chair of the National Hunger Commission, we went around and talked to people in the country who were on SNAP, and they said, this is a great program at getting you a card, but it does nothing to get me a job. I want a job.
Also today, you heard findings from a focus group of voters, Trump voters in Ohio. They are not at the poverty level, but they're above that. What did you learn from that research?
Well, we learned that they're struggling and that they're having a particular hard time with the costs of raising children and working and supporting their family. And they're uncertain of what they want from government, but they definitely want to earn more in their paychecks. They would like to see the product of their work lead to greater resources for their families.
How would those programs address them?
Well, you could increase a child tax credit, for instance, and give them a sort of refundable amount to compensate them for the lost dollars through payroll taxes. You could pass paid family leave so that when they have a child or a family member who's sick, that they can take time off from work and not lose income. You could increase child care assistance. These are three ways in which I think Congress is going to have to face up to the struggles of these families and decide what is the right course.
Robert Dorr, resident fellow in poverty studies at the American Enterprise Institute. Fascinating study, and you're doing some wonderful work on poverty. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Artists make a surprise discovery while restoring a masterpiece by Leonardo da Vinci. The large oil painting Adoration of the Magi returned to the Uffizi Gallery in Florence after nearly 6 years of restoration. The work shows Mary with the baby Jesus surrounded by visitors. But that's not all. The director of the museum says several additional figures were found in the background of the painting when it was restored.
This is a spectacular recovery of this most important painting by Leonardo. It's one of the three most important works by Leonardo da Vinci, together with the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper.
The painting is part of a special exhibit which opened today and runs through September. Who's with me? I'm going. You want to go? Let's go. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, I'm Lauren Ashburn. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter for a behind-the-scenes look at News Nightly. We leave you with a look at the clouds drifting slowly over the U.S. Capitol today, a view out of our windows here. Good night, and God bless.